And good evening from Philadelphia.
James here from Westchester, New York.
And welcome to UFO News Network Sunday. We've got a big show. Bob Lazar is undergoing a renaissance in the UFO field thanks to a new documentary that was just released this past week. And it's time to talk about everything Bob Lazar. We're going to go through everything and go into some detail that I think the recent documentary and maybe even Bob's own documentary from 1992, which I highly recommend, did not go into. We've got an all-star panel here with us. Joining us for the first time, breaking our roundtable gender barrier, is UFO researcher Chant Hannah, all the way from Arizona. Chant, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Joining us for the second time, and you may have already seen his little presentation on Bob Lazar in a video that he posted this week over on YouTube. Obviously, a big supporter of Bob's and his story. Ryan from Post Disclosure World, thanks for coming back on with us a second time, Ryan.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
And last but not least, Mr. Hattrick himself, making his record-breaking third appearance on our show, all the way from Michigan, another Bob Lazar supporter, Chris Wolford. Thanks again, Chris. The third time is the charm, like they say.
It seems to be. Thank you for having me.
All right. And let's get right down to it. Let's not play around. Lazar has undergone a renaissance, I would say, in attention paid to his story. A lot of people hate him. A lot of people love him. It's a complicated story. So before this new wave of attention towards his story came up, let's get everybody's opinion on where they were at on Bob Lazar before all this, before seeing the recent documentary and all the attention and praise and criticism that he's gotten. James, go ahead. Why don't you kick off on this?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Going back, I've been researching this topic for a while. So years and years ago, when I first saw his story, of course, I was fascinated. But to be quite honest, when I saw Stanton Friedman start talking trash about him, I was like, you know what, Stanton Friedman, he's a respected researcher. He's probably right. But then, I always come back to the stuff, and every time I went back, I was like, there seems like there's something to this. I got to be missing something. But at the same time, I was so conflicted with why Stanton Friedman had such a rub against him. So, it's something I've been going back and forth with for quite a few years. But again, the more I hear the guy talk, the more I'm convinced of his story, or at least convinced that he believes what he's saying. So that's basically my take on the story before the film.
Got it. Chant, what were your thoughts of Bob Lazar going back before the last week or so?
Well, I think he was instrumental in reconfirming and validating people's beliefs about ETs. I didn't need Lazar to believe that extraterrestrial civilizations exist. I've always felt it to be a mathematical probability that extraterrestrial civilizations exist. Lazar claims he was never interested in the field of ufology, and that the field of ufology came to him, and that it literally fell into his lap. Just jumping to something else, I have a problem with his claims regarding his academic degrees. I understand conspiracy theories floating around about how the government can erase one's past, but I still feel a little uneasy accepting his explanation.
Okay, yep. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Chris, what are your thoughts on Lazar up before this week?
I was in the pro camp that he was telling the truth the entire time, even with all the prostitution and him being arrested. I wasn't swayed either, in the way of like he's lying. The thing that really crystallized it for me was when George Knapp found Dennis, his superior, either in Washington State or somewhere on the West Coast. Now, obviously, he wouldn't talk to George Knapp, but the fact that he found Dennis, Dennis, the supervisor was Dennis. That's correct. Dennis. that solidified it for me, because here's Bob who, if he didn't work there, then how would he know this guy's name? You know, so that I always go back to.
Got it. And Ryan, your thoughts on Lazar before the last week or so?
Well, I mean, it's just been relatively recently that I've been digging into the data points with Bob Lazar and really researching him. I would say that prior to investigating Bob Lazar, I was probably agnostic on the whole thing. And as it stands now, I would say that probably 50-50. I mean, there is no smoking gun, but at the same time, there are many, many data points that are highly persuasive and compelling. And you couple that with the sincerity of Bob Lazar. He comes off as extremely sincere. He doesn't give you the impression he's lying. And then you look at all the people that knew him before 1989 when he came forward, people who know him now. And one thing none of these people say is, oh, this guy's he's a weirdo. He's a charlatan. He makes stuff up. He doesn't have some sort of history of just coming off as a liar. And when you look at the totality of the whole thing, you really, I mean, if you're an honest person, in my opinion, you don't have to believe, but you really shouldn't discount it, because there's just too many compelling factors when you look at it in totality. So that's basically the way I see it. And
me, this was a field or an aspect of the field that there are people who are working it that knew it better than I do. Generally, I always tried to focus most of my efforts on areas that were sort of undiscovered, left alone for the most part. So I didn't focus a whole lot on Lazar. I did look at his own videotape. That's sort of a principle I had going way back from the very beginning. When you have an opportunity to look at a particular aspect of the field, whenever possible, go back to the original source. That documentary was sitting out there. I did watch it. Didn't have a strong opinion one way or the other. I did find it interesting, and didn't completely rule it out, even though I was well aware of a lot of the caveats about Lazar, especially regarding his academic background, and I guess we'll get into that as we go along. But that's about where I left it, and in the last week or so, I've been digging a lot deeper. I've come to some conclusions, but those conclusions are a mixed bag, let's put it that way. And we'll explore that as we go along. Now, I understand that everybody here has watched the movie. Is that correct?
Yes.
The new movie,
Yes.
the new Lazar movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Let's go around the horn again and get everybody's thoughts on the movie. Let's start with you, James.
I like the movie. Maybe I'm a millennial. I don't know. I love because the production style, I thought it had a hip vibe to it. I thought it was fresh. It's not your typical, UFO documentary that's just the same as any other. I like the way Corbell kind of presents, the genre, with his own creative style. So I appreciated that as far as how the film was produced. The music was awesome. Obviously, what's his name? Did the soundtrack for that? The guy who did the Skinwalker one.
I don't know the name. I don't see it on
Blue, Black,
the marquee.
The Red, Blue, Black, Silver. And
I believe it is.
Yeah. Anyways, Corbell kind of explained in the beginning that what he was trying to do with the film was humanize Bob Lazar, because so many people were attacking him because they were detached from, that he's an actual person. So that was Corbell's kind of, way of approaching this. And, he explained that's why he didn't go too far into the schooling that Bob did, because even if that was true, that he lied about his education, that doesn't prove either other way that he did experience what he did at Area 51 and S4. But so overall, I liked the film. I liked it. I thought it was good for the genre. It was well done.
Got it. Chant, your thoughts on the movie itself?
Yeah, I didn't like it.
Okay.
Yeah, I can explain why. If I had never known about Lazar beforehand, I would have been confused about watching this movie. The timeline was scattered and it compromised the storyline. There was no synopsis at the beginning of the film. I think Jeremy was in the film too much. I was hoping to see some good footage of Bob, and I wasn't disappointed in that respect. I had to fast forward through Mickey Rourke's narrative and some really hokey B movie moments to get to the relevant parts of the film, what I thought was relevant. I didn't like the weird music in the background. At times it was overwhelming and distracting. And I didn't like the barrage of the tons of pictures in between and during the relevant parts of the film. The highlight, I guess, was Bob being raided by the FBI. That was very strange. I didn't like the effects used in this film. Bob's face and voice were distorted often, and it made it difficult to scrutinize what he had to say. I guess what was relevant to me that I really enjoyed watching was Terry Tavernetti, the polygraph examiner, former LA cop. He put Lazar through 4 tests and concluded there was no attempt to deceive. He felt there was credibility regarding what Lazar had to say, and he sent the results to 3 different polygraphers, and all found the results truthful. The interesting part to me was 54 minutes into the film, Bob is referencing the disc or a disc and talking about looking inside of it. And he said that the size of the seats of the craft were very small. And he says, it just led me to believe the size of the alien cadavers I saw, the size of the seats inside, sort of to just reconfirm that he felt that the alien cadavers he saw would have fit the size of the seats inside of the craft. Now, he's comparing these sizes to confirm his suspicions the craft was designed for small beings. The part that's conflicting to me, however, is earlier in the film, Bob states at the 47-minute mark that he never saw an alien at Area 51. To be fair, he did say he didn't hear anybody talking about any living aliens, and he didn't see any aliens walking around there. So he did say aliens were nicknamed also, just a random thing. Aliens were nicknamed the kids at Area 51.
Okay, well, we'll get back to that once we get through everybody. A few points are going to get brought up as we go along. But again, let's get everybody's sort of thumbnail assessment of the movie. Chris, it's your turn now. How'd you like the movie? I'm going to go on a limb and guess that you liked it.
Oh, it's terrible. No, I loved it. One word to describe it is bombshell. This, for me, confirmed a lot of other data points that I had researched before the film that I didn't know. I mean, I don't know if we want to give spoilers. I don't know if we want to go down that road. I don't know if Jerry would be cool with that. But the fact that he could...
Well, if it's a fact about the case, go ahead. Yeah, if it's a fact about the case,
well, the fact that yes. Jeremy Corbell found Mike Thigpen, and Mike Thigpen did not deny that he is the one that basically gave Bob Lazar the security clearance for working at Area 51. Now, he didn't talk about S4, but he did give him a security clearance. The fact that he won't go on camera sucks, but the fact that Jimmy found him and that he's a real person, another name that, again, Bob knew somehow, and Jeremy tracked him down and found him. That is huge. The other part for me that was very interesting is the fact where they found tape with a couple seconds worth of footage where they were messing with element 115. I went back and an old documentary where good old John Lear says Bob took multiple pieces of element 115 and kept them. So I don't know. Maybe that's what FBI was rating him. I mean, that's kind of what is proposed in the film. I don't know if that's definitive, but it is strange that they had everybody and their brother come and commence onto that United Nuclear up here in Michigan. It's pretty crazy. But no, I love the film. Everything about it was great. So, yeah.
Okay. Hey, Chris, real quick, how far is that place from you, from where you're at?
About 3.5 hours.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, if it was right around the corner, you ought to pop in and buy some beryllium off him or something.
Yeah.
And Ryan, your thoughts on the movie?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the movie. I really enjoyed seeing Bob's wife, seeing his good friend Mario. seeing the office space of United Nuclear, listening to one of the employees talk, seeing Bob through a different lens than you'll typically see if you scour YouTube for Bob Lazar videos, getting a more human side of him. So yeah, overall I enjoyed it. I thought the visuals were really attractive, and I thought I liked the background music as well. So overall, I really enjoyed it.
And for me, I got to be honest. I'll be fair here first, because The Hunt for the Skinwalker film that Jeremy did was released not too long ago. I saw that, and I got to say, I was pleasantly surprised, okay? But pleasantly disappointed by this particular film. And I think I can explain why in a bit of a nutshell. Looking at the facts of Skinwalker, okay? They're pretty well established. A lot of resources have gone into researching this place. Scientists, gear, time, the actual purchase of the property itself. So a lot of resources have gone into this, and the net result of all of it is nobody really seems to know what the hell they're dealing with out there. Okay, so the approach he used for that film worked very, very well. The approach that he used for this film about Bob, there's a lot there that's on the table. I mean, you can believe as much or as little of it, or none of it, or all of it as you want, but it's out there. And like, there were still a lot of unanswered questions, and I would say there was only one thing that this film actually did a little bit, that did better, not a little bit, but it did better than the original Bob's Own documentary from 1992, and that was Bob actually made the point that those the three cylindrical devices in the bottom of the gravity amplifiers, there you go, are actually targeted towards a particular point in space. He doesn't go into that detail in his original documentary, and he did explain that a little bit better, but still there are an awful lot of unanswered questions about this. And if he knows this stuff and he worked on it, it's essential that that information get out. Yes, he did go into a lot of detail in his own documentary, but still there were an awful lot of unanswered questions. He seemed that maybe he realized that and made a point to mention that, and maybe he did tell Corbell, yeah, absolutely include this part in the documentary. I mean, that's possible. Who knows about that? But that's really the only area, the only one point where this documentary actually bested the earlier Bob self-produced documentary. And otherwise, I have to admit, I was a little bit disappointed with this film. I don't think it did the entire story, the justice that it could have and should have. Again, if Bob really has what he says he has, yeah, okay, it's really nice. We saw a more human side. But to be honest with you, hey, the full documentary that he did himself, him cruising up in the Corvette and getting out, and I don't care if you believe me or not, and all this. I mean, that's Bob too, and that gives a pretty good insight into what the guy's all about. And I thought that was the essential document that you really want to take a look at if you want to get a good idea of what this story is all about. So okay, so there's that. So we got that. Not surprisingly, a mixed bag of opinions on the movie itself. Okay, now there was one point. Ryan, you had mentioned his buddy Mario Santa Cruz. And you being particularly impressed with that guy. I was as well, but Mario was really the only person or point that was brought up in the entire film that sort of backed up Bob's claim that at least he hung around or was on campus at Caltech back in the day. That's a long way from actually demonstrating that he's got a master's degree from Caltech, let alone MIT, which is on the other side of the country. So as about the academic background, I frankly don't believe that he does have master's degrees from those two colleges. forgetting about the fact that the claim has been that the records were wiped. You simply can't wipe everything out about a person's experience. It takes at least a year, sometimes two, sometimes more, to get a master's degree. Before you have the master's degree, you are a grad student. You are working with people. It's not like you're taking a bunch of intro to this or that courses where you're in this auditorium and maybe there's 200 or more students. I mean, these are fairly small operations. You live in an area, especially if he goes to the East Coast and he's living either in or near Cambridge, Mass. You're renting a place. Maybe you have a job that where you're supporting yourself while you're going through this school. Again, you've got colleagues there going through the same type of program. You've got professors. It just doesn't add up. I can understand where Corbell doesn't care if he was homeschooled. Knapp doesn't care. But Lazar made the claims, and the least you can do, okay, it's something that maybe a younger guy did, a guy who was roughly 30 at the time, but why not just own up to it? Because I don't think in any way, shape, or form it's ever been demonstrated that he has those advanced degrees from those institutions. Anybody want to jump in there on that?
My only question to that rebuttal, I should say, is when he was being prosecuted in court and they couldn't find the records too, wouldn't you think they would have thrown the book at him, but somehow he got out? That is not clear on how he exactly got out or wiggled his way out of, not seeing time behind bars.
Well, because I would say it's not an especially serious crime being involved with prostitution, a victimless crime, and he has no criminal record.
But the feds were pushing very hard to throw the book at him, and he didn't. That has to be stated for fact, because it is fact. They were going to throw the book at him, and they. But
ultimately, it's a judge that decides what the prosecutors.
Well,
want.
You don't think they can sway the judge? Are you? So.
Well, yeah. Okay, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying. I mean, that to me, they went looking too, and they couldn't find it. So really, I agree with Jeremy. Looking for his college degrees is kind of pointless. It's going down. We're muddying our tires and getting stuck in the same old rigmarole. And I know that we have to talk about it. It's great, but we're not talking about like the implications of what he's saying. And I know we're going to get there.
Right. But, yeah. Oh, yeah. We're absolutely going to get there. So, yeah, I don't want to spend all day on this. Now, one thing I did not see is that there were apparently bonus material. I have not seen that. And James, you said that you did. And in that bonus material, when you get a master's degree, you get a sheepskin, you get that diploma. And the reason why Bob, there is a reason that Bob claims he does not have possession of that. And do you want to go and share with the folks what that is, James?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they mentioned before, I think they mentioned even before that, prior to the film that I think his wife committed suicide, and he never went back to the house because it was too troubling for him, and that's where allegedly all his his degrees were. So
yeah. I mean, it's sad that happened, but
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And
but still, somebody else cleans out the house, and I mean,
yeah, I don't know. I heard.
I mean, that material went somewhere if it in fact exists. So I'm not sure that I buy into that. But okay, anybody else want to chime in on the academic claims about the master's degrees?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, sure. Thank you. I think I vaguely remember listening to John Lear in a video when he said that he had the transcripts of Lazar on his desk, something like that. And then when he went back to look for them, they had disappeared. But I have to double check on that. But I think I remember that was the case for John Lear.
Okay. I think that is the case. I remember hearing that.
Yeah.
What I was going to say is, if he did attend Caltech or MIT, you would hope that he seems like a pretty sociable guy, and you would think that one of his friends from when he was attending those universities, or you would at least hope, would come forward and say, yeah, I hanged out with Bob Lazar and we were both classmates. And as far as I know, that has not taken place.
Right. So that still to me is a problem. And another thing is Corbell is saying he doesn't care if he was homeschooled. He's not saying, yeah, I believe Bob has those master's degrees. Knapp, remember, Knapp also looked very, very hard for some kind of corroborating evidence that Lazar has those advanced degrees. He couldn't find it. Again, he's saying that he doesn't care. And again, to an extent, I don't disagree, but you can't ignore it. We do have to spend some time.
Well, here's another point. How in the hell would he have been able to work at Los Alamos without a college degree?
It's possible. I mean, I think it's possible to work for a quasi-state run agency or a government agency without a degree and even still be in the position of a physicist. I think that's possible. I know that's crazy, but I think it is possible.
No, it's not crazy. I think as UFO researchers, we may want to look into that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Well, that's what Stan Davis, Stanton Friedman, used to use as an argument against Bob Lazar is, well, how are you going to be a scientist, a physicist, when you don't have a college education? But the way I see it, the fact that, there are no credentials that we can pin down for Bob Lazar helps argue that both the fact that there isn't credentials helps argue that he could have been a physicist at S4, because you look at Snowden. He dropped out of high school. He didn't get any college degrees. And when you read about Snowden, everyone says he was the smartest guy in the room. He was capable of stealing secrets from the NSA and leaving the country. And he doesn't have a college degree, and he certainly was a top guy at the NSA. So we can certainly believe that it's very possible that Bob Lazar was a physicist at S4 if he did not have a college education.
Well, the government.
But at the same time, he might have had a degree, because it's rare that you would work at Los Alamos if you didn't have a degree. So you can look at it through both angles.
I think you're right. I think the government has done stranger things as far as hiring people with or without degrees. But I think it's possible that the government may not have wanted him to have a degree. Probably the best way to say it is maybe they wanted him because he didn't have degrees.
Exactly. I was just going to say maybe he was the perfect candidate, exactly what they were looking for.
Yeah.
Because, I know I'm kind of jumping ahead, but the government knew that he was friends with John Lear before he worked at S4. That is a fact. Mm-hmm. They knew he was friends with John Lear. So the fact that they hired him and he went to work is huge. I know Grant Cameron has made this point too, but I think it kind of gets lost in translation for people.
Well, when you consider how secretive S4 was, you have to assume that whoever is in charge of hiring is investigating the personality profile of who they're going to hire, because the security is so over the top. There's no way that they would hire someone like a renowned scientist with all kinds of degrees, who is well known. It would be much more difficult to be able to trust a person like that from coming forward than someone like Bob Lazar. And also, as has been mentioned, Bob Lazar is an eccentric. He built jet-powered cars, jet-powered bikes. He wasn't very conventional in many respects. And so if there was a security breach of some sort, he would be the perfect candidate to discredit. Whereas if you had a heavy hitter scientist come into S4 and you're so obsessed with secrecy, that's not what you want. You do not want the renowned physicist. You want someone who's a little bit more low key and ideally an eccentric, so that you can say, "Hey, this guy's crazy. Just look at what he's into." And that's probably what S4 wanted when they hire scientists, or at least you could make that argument.
Yeah, I like that theory. That's really interesting.
It would make sense. I mean, Lazar himself has stated when he was at S4, it was not conducive to scientific work. I mean, Ryan, the last time you were on this show, we talked the fact that there was only 22 people at S4, and the most of them were of military background, not scientific. that has to be noteworthy because the other part that Bob doesn't really talk about is they almost used mind control on him, yelling at him, asking him, why haven't you made any progress? I mean, getting right up in his grill and screaming at him. And his coworker, I can't think of his name. What was
Barry.
the guy's? Yeah, Barry. Him and Barry get yelled at all the time. And that's just how things worked over there, I guess. Or still might be.
Yeah, next toss-up question. Let's go around the horn. Does anyone doubt that Lazar didn't, does anyone doubt that Lazar didn't actually work where he said he worked, at Area 51 and S4?
I don't doubt it.
Yeah,
I think he did work there.
I don't doubt it. I do believe he worked there.
Yep.
Yeah, I believe he worked there.
Yeah.
There's too much evidence for it.
Yeah, way too much. And George Knapp, George Knapp was really thorough on that. I mean, George Knapp, you got to give him credit that there were things that he couldn't prove, but the things that he could prove, or that he could build a case for, he nailed down on. To the fact where he had those, I think it was like 4 people from Area 51 basically sit in a room and interrogate Bob Lazar. And, I'm sure he didn't say, hey, Bob, I'm going to have you meet these guys. I'm sure he kind of surprised them with it. And they were convinced that he had been to the facilities, at least of Area 51. And if you place him at Area 51, it's good enough to say he went to S4.
Chant?
Yeah, I believe he worked there. The hand ID scanner to get into S4, that was made by, I think, the Dentamat Corp.
I've got the picture of it now. So they touched on it a little bit in the film, but you found some additional information about that. So go ahead and share that with us, because I think this is really interesting, and it does definitely add to Lazar's claim that he did, in fact, work there.
Right. So the Identimat hand geometry device, which was launched in the early 1970s by the Identimation Corp, it adapted a hand reader concept developed and patented by Robert P. Miller. And it was actually created to measure the length of the 4 digits and compare the finger length measurements to basically ensure it was a rudimentary identification device, kind of like how we would scan people's retinas now when they go into a building as an employee. Well, they used that to identify people when they were going in and out of S4. And it was actually created for high security facilities for the U.S. Department of Energy, Western Electric, and the very people who hired Bob Lazar to work at S4, which was the U.S. Naval Intelligence.
Yep, that is Lazar's claim, that he did work for U.S. Naval Intelligence. So this is a significant find there, Chant. Nice job.
Yeah, it's an excellent point.
Yeah,
and
that's huge.
Yeah. This looks like the picture I've got up looks like the same picture that Corbell showed Lazar, and got quite a reaction from him in the movie.
Yeah, he did, and I would just like to add. This is nothing against Jeremy, because I know he probably had an incredible amount on his plate for this film, because it takes a lot to do a film, and it's really easy to criticize it. But when he handed that picture to Bob, and Bob looked so thrilled to be able to recognize it and feel validated by it, I think that was really important. The only part that I have, if I had Jeremy in front of me, I would ask him, why did he not take it upon himself to do a little bit more diligent research just to find out more about this device, to connect it like I did in this respect?
And he may, just chose not to include it, but,
exactly.
Considering, getting back to the film a little bit, some of the things that were included in the film, I don't know why he did that. I mean, he spent 5 minutes going over the hypnosis, which I thought was kind of a waste of time. I mean, Bob seemed to swear by it on the one hand, but it's a 95-minute film, and you spend 5 minutes on that when there was so much more that he could have included. Like apparently in the bonus material, Corbell found a guy who'd worked there as well, and said, yeah, Lazar was a physicist there. That he that's what he did there. He wasn't some flunky. He was working there as a physicist. and that's in the bonus material, I believe, which unfortunately I haven't seen. So,
well, he's got more bonus footage. I know for a trailer, Jeremy has Bob Lazar watching the gimbal video, and Jeremy has stated, at least through social media, that will be released through social media here in the not too distant future, because that's going to be very interesting.
got it. Okay. So let's go. Let me bring up a point that I think is very interesting that's been brought up around the internet, and it was not brought up at all, not touched at all in the film, and that is the fact that Robert Bigelow, who Corbell interviewed as part of his Skinwalker Ranch movie, and Bob Lazar at one point formed a corporation and worked together. They were both officers. This is a matter of public record. The Zeta Reticuli 2 Corporation. Not sure exactly what they did. It didn't seem to last terribly long, but they did do that, and neither Corbell neither Lazar or Bigelow were asked about this. And this seems to be pretty interesting and worthy of some follow-up. Any thoughts on that?
Maybe they don't want to talk about it. Maybe that's why. Yeah, if there was something to brag about for it, they probably wouldn't be bragging about. But maybe it was just something that they jumped on and nothing really became of it, so they just swept it under the rug.
But you know what? If you're a journalist, you ask the tough questions, even if you don't get an answer. Sometimes the non-answers are telling. You know what I mean? So anyone else have any thoughts on that?
Go ahead, Chant.
Oh, it just sounds like it sounds like two very strange personalities getting together. It's just an odd marriage of two, it sounds odd for these two people to get together to create a company.
To me, it doesn't sound strange at all. I mean, if Bob Bigelow knew or had a hint that Bob Lazar really did take a piece or multiple pieces of Element 115, wouldn't you think they would want to form a company and work together?
I don't know.
Bob Bigelow has stated that he knows that the ET presence is here, right? We all saw that 60-minute piece.
Yep.
I think he's a lot closer to the truth versus even maybe the DOD might be.
Well, if he's going to get rated over Element 115 by the FBI, I don't think that would last very long between he and Bigelow if that was the basis for their company.
Well, we don't know.
we really don't know a whole lot about that, but that is something that we would certainly like to find out about. And if you ever get the chance to ask Jeremy or Bob or either of the Bobs, certainly that would be one of the first questions that I would ask. What happened with that, and why didn't it work out? Although let me make one point about Bob as a person, which I think he's a pretty interesting guy, and he definitely seems like the kind of guy who just doesn't fit into rigid systems really well. He sort of a career entrepreneur. Looks like he's had the United Nuclear business going for 20 years now. So he's been doing that for quite some time. But before that, obviously, we already discussed it. He was involved in the brotheling business at one point in some way, shape, or form. Whether it was I think, as I recall, he was some sort of a consultant. But I've seen also that he bought in. So I'm not 100% sure where. Go ahead.
I believe he wrote a computer script or a code to basically have a data entry point for the hookers so they could get paid.
Yeah, I think it was something along those lines.
Yeah. That's what I always thought. But then I heard, and I should have made a note of the source on this, that he actually bought into the service and was actually a part owner.
I think he was a connoisseur of the ladies of the night too, but whatever, who cares? I mean,
yeah, I agree. Who cares?
But again, he's sort of a serial entrepreneur. He's starting businesses. He also had the photo processing lab in his house too, and that was a bit of a business for him as well. So this is a guy who's kind of likes calling his own shots more or less. And if I can see how that might have been an issue with him working with Bigelow, who's maybe from the same bent, and it's just two guys too much alike, and they weren't able to work together. It's hard to say there. Just speculating here.
Well, yeah, I don't know Bigelow, but from what I've read, it seems like he comes across as having a big ego. Difficult to work with. That's my understanding. But that's just hearsay.
Yeah, word about town is he's doesn't have a world's greatest boss coffee mug on his desk. I've heard that from a few people. Anything else about the movie stand out for anybody?
Well, one thing I kind of want to cover is, people. There's a lot of people who still doubt that he was even a physicist at Los Alamos. Believe it or not, that's still an issue for people.
That's ridiculous to me. It's just utterly ridiculous.
And Frank, do you have?
Oh, go ahead.
Did you get those images in?
I did. They're in here. Yeah. Let's. We want to go.
That's one thing.
Yeah. The newspaper clippings. Let me scoot over to that. And,
the newspaper there they are. That they did.
The jet set 200 miles an hour. The jet car. There he is in the Los Alamos Monitor. I can't make out the date. It looks like 81, maybe. I can't make out the date on that. It's a little bit small.
Yeah,
but,
that's all.
There he is. It's not the car so much that's important to Lazar, a physicist at the Los Alamos Mason Physics Facility. The important thing is the jet engine. It's something he's been working on for years.
Yeah, so that's definitely an interesting point. That because if he was at Los Alamos to begin with.
And Dr. Kringle, the podcast with Jimmy Corbell with Dr. Kringle is huge. I encourage people to listen to it. I know as of 2 years ago, people didn't even know that even existed. I just came across it, listened to it. I was blown away. I know some people are like, it doesn't really persuade me, but I guess I'm easily persuaded. So
yeah, that's something that why was the timing off, that he found it too late and he wasn't able to include it in the film? Again, that's something I would think that you would want to put in the movie.
Well, we could, and I'm going to throw some shade towards Stanton Friedman, but the reason why I think Kringle did not go on camera is because Stanton Friedman bugged him so much after that podcast was released. Stanton called him a bunch of times and gave him a hard time, and basically what it came of it is that Stanton still maintained that, well, yeah, he was at Los Alamos, but he wasn't a physicist.
Yeah, I have an opinion on that.
Sure.
Here's what really bothers me. The idea that Dr. Kringle would not have the capacity to distinguish between someone that is a physicist and not is ridiculous. If indeed it was difficult to discern the job description of different people, then he probably in his conversation that we're referencing, he would have been like, well, I can't be sure he was a scientist, but I think he was. But his language is crystal clear. He was asked without any qualifications, do you know that Bob Lazar was a physicist at Los Alamos? He said yes. This idea that you can read through the transcript and come to any other conclusion absolutely boggles my mind. And anyone who has trouble deciphering what's going on in that transcript, to me, just has overwhelming bias.
Just to jump in really quick, Grant Cameron in the chat says Bigelow brought up everything to do with UFOs. It was nothing personal. So there's Grant with his feedback on all that.
Oh,
okay.
Grant.
Hello, Grant. No, I was going to say, UFO Jesus. Sorry, Ryan. Ryan makes a great point. It boils down to jealousy and the implications of what does it mean, the fact that Bob was telling the truth. It's huge implications. And some people don't want to have to deal with that. They don't want the paradigm to be shifted any way, shape, or form. Honestly, I feel there's a few UFO researchers, I'm not going to name names, who don't want this to be solved. Not that we're going to solve it, but they don't want to be solved. They want that. And I don't want to say like they're chasing the almighty dollar, but they don't want it solved in so much that what Lazar says is I don't know where I was going with this.
It does seem like some of them have an ulterior motive, in my opinion. And look, if I'm off base, then someone show me how I'm off base, and I will stand corrected. But when I look at that transcript that was had with Kringle, it's so crystal clear. And this is a guy with a PhD from MIT, very scientific minded, very exacting in his language. That's sort of the culture. And for him to be asked, was he a physicist? Do you know that he was a physicist at Los Alamos? And his response is yes. It just blows my mind that people try to do all kinds of mental gymnastics and say, well, that doesn't necessarily mean he knew. Well, if he didn't know he was a scientist, then he would have qualified and said, well, it's really difficult at Los Alamos because there's technicians, there's janitors, there's this and there's that. So I'm not sure. There was no hesitation. He just said, yeah, my understanding is he was a scientist. And the idea that an internet expert would be better equipped to discern whether someone was a scientist or not in comparison to a guy who actually worked at the facility is absolutely ridiculous.
Ryan, help me out. In the interview, doesn't Kringle say that he said in a security briefing with Bob Lazar?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, the janitor doesn't do that. What planet are you on? You just are denying facts. At this point, you're just denying facts. So I'm just going to call you up with UFO Jesus.
And do we have anything else on the movie?
Well, I wanted to bring up what Bob thought were the most important points to him of all, and that is the suppression of extremely advanced technology and the suppression of unknown science. That's what he said. He said those two things are the most important to him, and he also felt that there is another civilization out there, extraterrestrial civilization, and that it's a crime not to tell humanity about that. And I just thought it was interesting that he said that we have in our possession, meaning the U.S. government, artifacts from an extraterrestrial civilization.
Again, it's implications. I mean, that is daunting to some people. So of course, they're going to deny it. They don't want to have anything to do with that. They'll go and they'll say, well, the ET hypothesis doesn't explain this or that. And I get that. But the fact that we have 9 craft, because that's what Lazar said that we had, is huge. I don't think that he would want to just make up a random number and say, oh, yeah, we had 9 or I saw 9. I don't think he's that kind of person. But again, it's the implications, and people don't want to have to deal with that. I don't know why. I mean, I know why. I think I know why. But it's just too sad that people don't want to – they can't get past that point.
And it's interesting that Lazar – his inclination is that these craft were discovered in an archaeological excavation. My perspective on how these craft
where did you pick that up, Ryan? I didn't see that in the movie.
I don't think it was in the movie, but I've heard it.
It was coast to coast. It was on coast to coast. Okay. It was on with George. That's his belief. He qualifies that with he doesn't know that's true. He's not saying he has any. He can't substantiate it, but from the mutterings that he heard when he was working at S4 from like his superiors, for some reason that picture is painted for him.
Okay.
But let's say Lazar is telling the truth, and like I said, I'm 50-50, but I would not be surprised if he's telling the truth at all. I suspect that he might be. To be clear, this is my overall picture. He's either telling the truth or he's a disinformation agent. I do not believe that I have a hard time believing he just has this deeply embedded pathology that is manifested in the way it has for 30 years. And people say, well, why would he be a disinformation agent? By saying the things he said, it put all the eyes on Area 51, and that's a fair point. But at the same time, now maybe this is far-fetched. I don't know. I'm not an intelligence officer. But let's say maybe what Bob Lazar wanted to do, or the people that hired him, because he did talk about the technology. He talked about how it worked. and some of the physics behind it. You could make the argument, I don't know if it's a good argument, but you could make the argument that he was trying to throw the Russians and the Chinese off on exactly how these craft work. And so in that sense, he was a disinformation agent. But anyways, and that's just a guess. I'm not even saying I believe that or think that it's likely. But the whole excavation hypothesis that Lazar has is really interesting. It suggests that these craft are ancient. And but my perspective would be this: I don't believe for a second that if they were excavated, that it's just random and humans just came across it. If a really advanced civilization left craft somewhere that are fully operational and in perfect condition, then they did so for a purpose. They didn't just be like, we got to go, so let's just leave this craft here and no one's going to find it. I don't think
so.
Yeah.
Almost reminiscent of the monolith on the moon in 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to mention, there was 500 pounds of 115 somewhere with the crafts.
Yeah, I mean, this goes to the point, and I can't remember if I made it the last time I was on, that in the 1950s, the CIA went across the globe trying to find ancient technologies. And could this have been a part of what's that?
Who were the Nazis?
I'm not, because James, we're going to get grilled here. People are going to get us crispy if we go down that road. But yes, you are correct. I mean, that's a possibility.
No, it's a fact that the Nazis went to Antarctica. There's no debating that. They went there and they put their flags and everything. Whether what they were doing there, you can try to debate that. But the people that were behind that were into the occult. And they were looking.
Yeah.
So, but that's just a side note.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're good on the movie now. Everybody has everything out on the Corbell film about Bob that they want to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I'll bring it up. It's just a side thing. Bob in the movie said, "Here's a device that's producing gravity and using it as propulsion." But then I listened to his own documentary, and he said that there was no way that anything could produce gravity for propulsion technology. So it could not produce gravity. So, in the Corbell film, he said that there's a device that he saw being the craft that could produce gravity. And then in his old documentary, 10 minutes into the film, he said he didn't know of anything that could produce gravity. So maybe he contradicted himself and fixed that later, but I didn't catch it. But he did contradict himself in that way.
Okay. Yeah, and let's get over now, since we pretty much wrapped up the Corbell film. Has everybody here seen the original Bob documentary from 1992?
That's the one I was referring to, yes.
Right. You have. Okay, you've seen it. Ryan, did you get a chance to watch that?
Yes.
Chris, have you watched it?
Yep.
Okay. Now, basically, that documentary, Bob broke it up into a couple different parts. Part one, he talked about the ships and framed it in such a way that this was material that he himself could verify. Then in the second part of the documentary that he produced, he discussed being taken into a room and shown a number of documents, essentially an alien Bible sort of type thing, where the entire history of man's interaction with the aliens, they were specifically identified as coming from Zeta Reticuli and so on. Let's talk about that a little bit. Myself, I think it's it's interesting, but I will say this right off the top, and Bob was very specific about this in his own documentary too, that he couldn't verify it, that he didn't necessarily, the implication there is he didn't necessarily believe what he was reading was true either. And I have to say that some of that material shown that he went over sounds very much like a lot of AFOSI, which is the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, like a lot of AFOSI disinformation that was circulating in that time frame, where they would tie sort of known facts that are floating around in the field. And the Majestic 12 documents, they say that there was a meeting regarding forming this Majestic 12 organization in the Oval Office where Truman, James Forrestal, then Secretary of Defense, and Vannevar Bush, who had headed up the organization that oversaw the Manhattan Project, who was also the founder of the Raytheon Corporation, that they were present, and that's where the Majestic 12 was founded. And that meeting did take place. Those three individuals were there. That is a fact. Another interesting note regarding the Serpo information, which some of you might be familiar with, that ties this alleged meeting between ETs and folks at Military Air Force Base. Ties it to a real specific date, which happens to be the same date of the Lonnie Zamora Socorro sighting, April 24th, 1964. So they have a tendency to do that. And Bob's saying that it's known to them that these particular ETs are from the Zeta Reticuli. Of course, anybody who knows anything about the Betty and Barney Hill case knows that the star map that Betty drew was sort of reverse engineered by someone, and they came up with that star alignment as matching a view of the Earth from the Zeta Reticuli system. So any thoughts on the material that Bob went through in that second half of his presentation?
I think it was all disinformation, all of it.
All of it,
okay. Or most of it was disinformation. I agree with you. I mean, think of it this way. This is S4. This is the most secretive project in the world, most secretive project in the U.S. military. What would be their incentive to give physicists precise information on some of this history? I don't see it. It would not help them achieve their goal of back engineering the craft. So they would use that as an opportunity to spread disinformation, so that if someone spills their guts and talks about these briefings, it will be easy to discredit them. I would go so far as that I actually believe that it's possible that the different employees that read those briefings read slightly different information, so that they could track whoever was leaking information because each individual that worked at S4 was given slightly different information in the briefing. So that's my perspective on it.
Ryan, I'm thinking that maybe you work for some sort of military intelligence organization coming up with that plan. That was holy mackerel there, man. That is some Machiavellian thinking to the nth degree.
But for the time
no
frame,
comment from Ryan. I think he hung up.
But for the time frame, that is correct. I mean, you are right. This is the time of Paul Benowitz. And if people, I don't know if it's in that documentary, I know that Bob Lazar has talked about this. In those briefing documents, Dulce is mentioned in those documents. And again, that goes back to Rich Doty and Paul Benowitz and that whole affair. So, yes, I'm in the camp of Ryan that they just fed all that was just garbage. And maybe that was a easy way to track. If anybody spilled, yes, we could track it back to them. Or the other idea is they knew that this guy was going to have issues at some point and spill the beans. And this speaks to what Grant Cameron has always said, that they wanted this to happen. Now, I'm not saying that is the case, but I could see that possibly being the case. I mean, what do you guys think?
My thinking is there's two possibilities here, that Bob made up that aspect of the story, which means that he would have had to write all this out and essentially know some old Fozy tricks at that point in time, where I think we're a little bit more aware of them now, but I'm not sure how aware of them we were back in the time frame where he produced this film back in '92. So I think there's two possibilities that Bob is accurately recounting that aspect of the story, that he was brought in, that he was shown these documents, and that's what was in there, what he recounted. And I'm leaning towards, I won't say that I believe it, but I'm saying it's the simpler explanation, that did in fact happen pretty much the way he describes it. That's where I am on that.
Yeah, I think they probably had that there, and maybe that could have been an element that was all fabricated just to discredit him as well if he ever were to talk.
I think that's a great point, what you just said.
Yeah, just because you have the technical end that he was working on, and then said, oh well, if he starts talking about some alien Bible, it's going to be all nonsense.
Right.
And do any of us think that we do actually know that these ETs are in fact from Zeta Reticuli, and that the humans had been genetically manipulated a number of times over the years and all that? Do any of us believe the material that Bob himself didn't exactly vouch for in his presentation?
Nobody could verify that, obviously. I mean, and that's the point.
I think what you're asking is what's your gut feeling, right? Because Ryan's right.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. We all think that he was fed some disinformation.
Doesn't even matter because there's no way to verify it. So it's.
Well, we're asking opinions. We're kicking some ideas around.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I have no idea, but I actually wanted to bring up something that Chant referenced before, which was the when Bob Lazar talks about seeing the cadavers.
Yeah.
That he saw the cadavers in the briefings. That's how he explained it. So he saw the cadavers in the briefings, and when he saw that, and then he saw how small the seats were, that's what kind of made him think. And then again, maybe that was planted there for that reason.
Here's the part I don't understand. So are the briefing that he's talking about, is it the same briefing that he got an overview of the other projects going on at S4?
Yes.
Is that the same stuff?
Yeah, it was basically the last 15 minutes or so of his documentary.
To me, and Ryan could speak to this point too, S4 was not conducive to scientific thinking, right? Because they were oppressive. They didn't want you talking to anybody. You could only talk to one other guy. You couldn't work the problem with other scientists there. They certainly weren't getting the best and brightest. And they really haven't gotten anywhere. The prior guy, the Bob Lazar, blew himself up by cutting into the core of the antimatter reactor. So the point I'm trying to make is I don't remember where I was going with this. I had a good point. But go ahead, Ryan.
Well, one thing I don't think people contemplate enough is, why is there so much secrecy? The first thing people think of, well, we don't want the Chinese and the Russians to get this technology. That's a part of it. But a big part of it that's not talked about enough, in my opinion, is the people that are running S4, they know that if this was ever to come to light, if it was ever to come to light that there's a tiny speck within the U.S. government that has articles from another star system, they would get a backlash, the likes of which you can't even possibly imagine. The entire scientific community would go after them. The media would go after them. The spiritual and religious community would go after them. Every single human being on this planet would hate their guts with a passion. And that is part of what motivates these people at S4 to be so secretive. They don't want to have to deal with that. They don't want to have to deal with the legal repercussions of it being found out that we have technology that would completely rewrite the books on physics and completely rewrite human history, completely change the scientific paradigm. Yes, a big part of it is that Russia and China do not get this technology, but another big part of it is because they would be the most despised human beings on the face of this earth if it was ever to come to light.
Brian, to your point, and Chant had made this point, the implications of, we have this technology. It speaks to what Richard Dolan says is a true breakaway civilization. These are guys that work at a facility that when they go home, they know different science than you and I. They know other things that you and I don't know. So in essence, it is a breakaway civilization. It's a whole planet unto itself. S4 is a whole nother planet.
I agree.
They know different things that you and I don't. I want to know how much taxpayer money has gone there. I can guarantee it's probably trillions. It's a pretty scary thing. And I think Ryan has a point. They are scared crapless of the repercussions that would come back, the blowback on them if this ever truly got out.
They're not even working within the purview of the U.S. government. In some sense, They're not part of the U.S. government. They're like this little island that has succeeded from the United States, and it's very dysfunctional across the board. And I hope that in sometime very soon this will all come to light. Because it's such as Lazar himself said, it's a tremendous injustice toward the scientific community and to the world at large. I mean, you just can't not tell everyone about something this big that changes everything we know about our existence in this universe.
Yeah. Just really one quick point that is maybe a little bit off track, but not entirely, about Area 51. What a lot of people don't realize is it was founded in 1955 to test spy planes. The U-2 was tested there. The SR-71 was tested there. It was founded by a fellow named Kelly Johnson, who headed up the Lockheed Skunk Works. The CIA went to him, said, look, we want President Eisenhower wants this spy plane, and we want to find a great secret, out-of-the-way place where we can test it. And Kelly Johnson was actually, at that point, head of the Skunk Works. But earlier, while he was just working there, he had a couple of UFO sightings himself. So the connections between UFOs and Area 51 really go back before ground was even broken on the construction of the base. Johnson had 2 UFO sightings. They're well documented. One of them had himself on the ground, and then a military plane in the air with 4 witnesses that both witnessed the same UFO out near Point Mugu, near Catalina Island, which is not too far from where the Tic Tac case took place. So there are connections going way back. And then, of course, Johnson's protege was Ben Rich, and his connections to UFOs are a little bit better known. His correspondence with John Andrews, where he said he does believe in UFOs, and also a little bit later on, the conversation that he had with Jan Harzan, who heads up MUFON these days, has been has been out and about. It's made the circuit. So I just wanted to jump in there. The connections may not have been the entire base itself was not known until Lazar came about, but the connections to UFOs go way back to the very beginning of that particular base. So I just wanted to get that in there. And let's get back to Bob's documentary. Again, any thoughts? I think we seem to be pretty much all on the same page here, that we do tend to believe Lazar's part of the story, that he was shown these various and sundry documents, but we don't necessarily believe that they are at all accurate. Is that about right? Yes. That's about where I'm at. That seems to be, we're all pretty much on that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. And now let's get down to where the rubber sort of meets the road. And this was covered in the movie a little bit. Bob covered it in great detail in his own documentary, the infamous Element 115. Now I want to go over this a little bit. It's very important to note, I think, that all of the elements from 95 up through actually we're all the way up to 118 at this point. Are synthesized elements. They're not natural elements. They are synthesized, created, invented in laboratories. So for Bob to say back in 92 that there's going to be an element 115 was really not going out on a limb all that much. Seemed to me in the movie, though, they were definitely alluding to the point that the feeling there is that the element 115, which is known as Moscovium, was mentioned in the movie, and that they seem to be holding the position, Corbell and Lazar, that the element 115 that Bob in fact worked with, or claims to have worked with at Area 51, is one and the same as Moscovium. Did anybody else pick up on that? Did I misinterpret that? Any thoughts on that? I guess not.
That's not the point that blew me away with 115. The fact that when Jeremy called other scientists, and the fact that the other scientists called Bob Lazar to get answers when dealing with 115 was huge for me. That's yet another nugget of data that supports his claim, I guess, for me. But
well, they bought it. They obviously bought into his story, and otherwise,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little bit skeptical. I can understand. Let's assume that everything that Bob says about that aspect of his story is correct. I can understand how internally it's an element that they weren't familiar with at that point in time. They were up to element 114, so calling it 115 is not that big a deal to me, and that. It just so happens that the very next element that happens to get synthesized in a lab just happens to be the same element that it seems to be. They seem to be claiming is one and the same. That seems,
yeah, I mean, it was inevitable that it would be synthesized in the future. So I agree with what you're saying.
Well, it's inevitable that another element was going to be synthesized, and just the same, there are 3 additional elements that have been synthesized since. I can't see. Let me hang on a sec. Just give me a sec here. Hang on.
Okay.
Go ahead. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Okay,
I'll dig up a graphic here.
So you can't have element 116 without element 115. And just to quote Bob in that documentary, he said the extraterrestrial craft power source inside the reactor of the saucer, element 115 bombarded with a proton, which plugs into the nucleus of the 115 atom and becomes element 116.
Yes, I was going to bring that up, but okay,
right.
Keep going.
And then it immediately decays and releases or radiates small amounts of antimatter. The antimatter is released in a vacuum into a secure tube to keep it from reacting to the matter around it. It is then directed to the gaseous matter target at the end of the tube. The matter and antimatter collide and annihilate, converting to energy. The heat from this reaction is converted into electrical energy at a near 100% efficient thermal electric generator. This is the device that converts heat directly into electrical energy to run the ship. Many of our satellites and space probes use thermal electric generators to run themselves, but their efficiency is very low. Anyway, the point is that element 115, once it decays, turns into element 116, according to Bob.
Right. Now, we know that moscovium is 115, livermorium is 116. Now, he said that in his documentary, obviously, before these elements were synthesized in a lab. But none of that was mentioned. I mean, it wouldn't be difficult for me to claim right now that I had some sort of extraterrestrial contact, and they tell me that, no, they're wrong, it's element 119, and at some point in time, an element 119 is going to be synthesized in some lab somewhere in the world, and then I come out and say, see, I'm vindicated. There is element 119. I'm right about all that. So I'm a little bit skeptical of those claims. And of course, element 117 is tennessine, and 118 is organesson. So there's that. But elements from 95 on up, they are synthesized in labs, and at some point in time in the future, there's going to be a 119, a 120, and so on up the road. I think that's inevitable, and hanging their hats on this 115, I'm a little bit skeptical of that part of the story.
Even Jeremy said that that Bob said to him afterwards, when Jeremy called him, said, "Hey, 115 was synthesized." That Bob said, "Well, I had a 50-50 chance." So I mean, he wasn't really hanging his hat on that. In that sense, he was just trying to explain what he thought he had learned there.
50-50 chance. Isn't that referencing the particle wave versus particle versus wave of gravity?
Yeah.
But either way, Bob Lazar has never pushed that as a piece of evidence that he's telling the truth, and I agree with Frank that it's not a big. It's not. It was inevitably going to be synthesized, so it really doesn't prove Bob's story at all, in my opinion. But I do think that is a big point to is that back in '89 he was emphasizing, he was saying that gravity is a wave and not a particle. And if you were to make up a story and you were committed to that story being true years into the future, I don't know about you, but I'd be very apprehensive pushing forward a theory that at the very minimum had a 50% chance being wrong. If you were a charlatan and you were a con man, that's an angle you probably would try to avoid at all costs. But Lazar's like, nope. Gravity is a wave. It is not a particle. He's very adamant about that. And it was like 5 years ago that they did experiments that vindicated him and proved that, yes, indeed, according to modern day science, gravity is a wave and it is not a particle.
Right. And so Bob also pointed out that gravity, there's two different kinds of gravity. And there's gravity A, which is a small scale of gravity used for interstellar travel, according to him. And it's the strongest of the two kinds of gravitational fields. And he believes it's gravity A is what aliens use to help commandeer their crafts. And that gravity B is a big gravity field that holds planets together, for example.
Again, hidden science, you know.
And I think it's worth saying, Luis Elizondo has said that we're getting very close to understanding how this technology works. He said that. I think it's fair to assume that some of the deep, dark, unacknowledged projects probably know more than Elizondo knows. But according to what Elizondo is privy to, he says we're getting close to understand this technology. Yeah, he says that...
just not to interrupt too much, but Ben Rich has been quoted as saying that they already understand how to do that.
Yeah, that's true.
To do that. So just wanted to bring that up. But go ahead, finish. Sorry about that, Ryan. But
no, that's a very good point to interject. But what I was going to say is, what's interesting is at least a decade from now, 2 decades from now, 3 decades from now, if it becomes in the public domain how this technology actually works, and it starts to line up with what Bob Lazar said, then the people at S4, that part of the U.S. government, they got a problem on their hands. Because if the technology, if what is conveyed about the technology starts to line up with what Bob Lazar said back in the 80s and what he still says today, there's your verification. There's your smoking gun. I don't think that, to me, would be a smoking gun if they say, well, this is how it works, and it starts to mimic what Bob Lazar said. Then you know that the whole entire story was true, and that's inevitable. I don't know if that will happen in our lifetime, but eventually we will figure this technology out if we haven't already. Which I don't think we have. And there you go. Bob Lazar will literally be in the history books if indeed, when we figure this technology out, it is in alignment with what Bob Lazar said in regards to how it works.
Well, and it's interesting how Bob says we have the technology, whatever the technology is, within our grasp. We have it in our possession, as he said, but we actually don't know what it is. So that was his job, was to it was basically to reverse engineer it. But they still don't know what it is. They can't figure it out.
Well, one thing that I find a little bit troublesome is that he never explains how this gravity is able to help these ships generate the speed necessary to travel interstellar distances in a reasonable amount of time. That's one thing that he doesn't really go into in any great detail. And that seems to me to be the real problem with interstellar travel. Distance. I'm sorry, go ahead.
He did give one detail. Okay. He said that element 115 is used to run the ship and that it depletes very slowly, so it could be used for 20 to 30 years from very minute amounts of it.
Well, I think Bob Lazar said that the craft's technology bends space and time.
Yes.
So the craft itself does not have to go anywhere near, or at least it doesn't have to exceed the speed of light. It doesn't have to break that law that you cannot exceed the speed of light. My understanding is that space and time is being folded, and so, I mean, this is like over your head physics, but the basic understanding, and that's all I'll ever have, is that it's traversing great distances without actually going beyond the speed of light, because space and time is folding on itself, and it's kind of like a shortcut, and that's basically all I understand about it.
I was going to say the ship is pulling itself towards the point that you want to go towards, so It's folding that, and you don't have to go fast for that. You really don't.
So what Bob was saying is that if we produce an intense gravitational field, we can distort time to go from point A to point B, no matter how vast the distances are, without traveling in a linear mode near the speeds of light, like Ryan was saying. We don't have to break, the speed of light.
Okay. It goes back to the hidden science. I mean, again, the fact that that's like, I don't know that physicists want to acknowledge that, but if they were given, maybe if we sat them down with Bob Lazar and he could explain, maybe they could grasp it. Maybe they couldn't. I don't know. It would just be an interesting experience to see what they would say. Maybe they just laugh at him and say, no, that couldn't happen. But maybe he is, completely really good person to explain this to other scientists. I don't know.
Well, one of the criticisms of Lazar's initial theory, although they did seem to take some steps toward clearing that up in the Corbell film, was that gravity doesn't sort of pick and choose what it's going to attract. When gravity attracts something, going back to the Galileo experiment with dropping the hammer and the feather, they both fall at the same rate. That experiment was repeated during one of the moonwalks by astronaut David Scott on the moon. He had a feather, he had a hammer, he dropped it. They both hit the lunar surface at the same time. It doesn't pick and choose. It doesn't discriminate. So if you're going to create this intense gravitational field around the ship, it's going to draw everything towards the ship rather than one particular point. In Bob's documentary, his original documentary, he doesn't really go into that too much, but in the Corbell film, he does make an attempt at explaining that, well, it's directed at a particular point. That's not necessarily a far-reaching, fully satisfactory explanation, but he did at least address it a little bit.
I guess.
Yeah, I mean.
Oh, go ahead, James.
No, I was going to say that's something so advanced that Bob even said that he did his best to try to explain what he thought he understood. We're talking about they couldn't reverse the technology, so they obviously don't have a complete understanding of it.
My point was he has forgotten a lot of that information. That's why he had the hypnotist hypnotize them. Even like a couple of months after working there, whoever the military were there, whether they're private contractors or U.S. DoD guys, I don't know, but whoever they were very keen on making it so you were basically mind controlled. I mean, there's a point where they don't say it in the documentary, and he doesn't talk about it in his documentary, but he was forced to drink something weird that they didn't tell him what it was. He was fearful that they were going to kill him because of what he knew, right? I mean, he had his tires shot out. He was carrying an Uzi around. He had this car broken into. So that plays a lot of brain trauma to the fact that you can't remember everything. And I don't fault Bob for that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I mean, if he can remember this part versus that part, it is what it is. I can't force him to remember everything. I guess what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point I do want to touch on and ask again around the horn about. As far as the blowback that Bob claims to have suffered, does anyone doubt that? I mean, I don't. At the very least, he outed Area 51, a highly classified top secret base, wasn't even acknowledged as existing until more than a generation after Bob came forward. At the very least, that's going to make a lot of people angry, regardless of what the accuracy of what he's sharing about the UFO tech. No one here, does anyone here doubt that that part of his story is at least accurate?
I will say this, from the documentary UFO Cover-Up Live from 1988, so 6 months before Bob mentions Area 51, it's in that documentary, and I posted on Instagram, I think I posted it on Facebook too, that was mentioned in the I guess flow chart of. Yeah. So that's huge. And again, that could be total disinformation. But the fact that it was out there in 1988, a full 6 months before Bob was working at S4, is interesting. I don't know how much people really care about that, but.
Well, it is. It's actually could be used by. It's a point that could be used by a skeptic, and so you could easily say, "Well, Bob watched that and put two and two together and came up with the story."
Yeah, that's true. But from everything that we know of Bob, he wasn't in the subject at all. He wasn't into this. I mean, he even says both in the documentary, the current one and that old one, he thought what he was seeing was what we made, and it explained all the UFO sightings. Oh, we made them. But once he got to work on it and got to see inside, he quickly realized that's not the case.
Yeah, and that's one thing I do believe. I don't believe he was ever into UFOs or any adjacent subjects to UFOs, whether it's ghosts, Bigfoot, anything like that. And I think that lends a lot to his credibility. I mean, this is a guy who has no history of being into these kind of subject matters, and then one day we're to believe that he wakes up and he commits this huge tall tale with all these details, and it's like, I don't know, maybe, but it doesn't seem all that. I'm not discounting that, but I mean, it just doesn't seem all that likely. Something else must be going on.
And now going back to that flow chart, I've seen that documentary. I can't remember the details, but my guess is they did not go into detail. What is this Area 51 and where is it? And you fly there. You fly there from an airport in Las Vegas to get there, and all the little details that he does in fact get right.
Yeah, I mean, the fact, and that goes back to the stuff that he knew. Like, he knew where McCarran Airport was. He knew what the cafeteria in Area 51 looked like. He knew how to pay for his lunch. He knew certain parts that if you hadn't been there, you wouldn't know. So I know that's not touching on what we were talking about, but the blowback, yes, I definitely think that it hurt his life. I mean, obviously it hurt that relationship. His wife was having an affair because he was gone all the time at weird hours. And again, it goes to that mind control of, and I know some people would say mind control is not real. It's very much real. They would call him at like 2 o'clock in the morning and say, "Hey, Bob, be to McCarran by 2:45. Your flight's leaving." And by 4 o'clock in the morning, he's at S4. I mean, that's nobody would want to work like that. I know I wouldn't. I don't think you guys would.
Well, actually, your point there raises a question that I've got that's never been answered as far as I know. How long did he actually work there? Does anyone know?
6 months.
6 months,
believe.
okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
6 months.
Yep. And here's a not known fact. He was not fired. Okay? Let that be very clear. He was not fired from working at S4 after the breach of being caught with Gene Huff, John Lear, and his wife, the second or third time that they were out there and filming the test sessions. He was not fired. They asked him to come back. He did not go back. He quit showing up because he was like, I've had enough. You people are messing with me. You've known about this affair with my wife for how long? You didn't say anything. He just had enough. So that is the interesting part that, again, gets lost in translation. Yep. Some researchers don't even know about that portion.
And that's another point that we haven't discussed. How did he know about the schedule of the flights, the test flights?
Yeah. And the location, too. That was over Papoose Lake,
Yeah.
And that would be very sensitive. I mean, even if you were to say, well, someone told him, okay, so who is this person telling him who has a security clearance and is literally breaching his security clearance to tell Bob Lazar? No matter how you slice it, any kind of test flight, even if it was a weather balloon, this is the kind of information that you don't freely share to anyone. So there's no logical reason he should have known about what was going on at Papoose Lake unless he had some real connection to the Area 51 complex.
Yeah, well, it's an S4.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where they did the test.
Well, as we round into the home stretch here, does anybody else have a point that they want to bring up that we haven't gotten to at this point?
I could bring up some James Goodall stuff that, like, Jim Goodall looked into whether S4 was real, and on 2 different occasions he was yelled at and told never to ask that again.
Can you tell us who James Goodall is?
James Goodall is a former SR-71 pilot he was in the Air National Guard or Air Force Reserve, excuse me, up until like Desert Storm, and he was a aviation. I don't know, like he wrote books about the SR-71. He himself flew the SR-71. He wrote books about the F-117. He was a good friend of Bob Lazar, a good friend of John Lear, and they would go out. Not so much James Goodall those 3 times, but Goodall would go on subsequent visits to like Freedom Ridge and to what's the other one? I can't think of the other mountain range, Tickapoo Peak, and look down on Area 51 and take pictures. But James Goodall, being that he was in the program for SR-71 flying, he knew certain people in certain parts of the Defense Department. And on 2 different occasions, one, he was at the Pentagon right after or right near around Desert Storm before he was recalled. And he asked about S4 and was grilled and said, if you ask about this again, we will demote you and you'll be dishonorably discharged. Another story that he has is there was an F-117 pilot who him and a co-pilot of another F-117 had a access pass of the Nevada test site. They could go anywhere they want. So they jumped in a Humvee and they drove down that road from Area 51 all the way down south, 14 or 15 miles, whatever it is, down to where Papoose Lake would be. And all of a sudden security were on them like flies on you know what. And they were told to leave. The F-117 pilot, who's a commander, said, no, we have a pass that we could be anywhere. And they said, that pass doesn't work here. Turn around and go back where you come from. So those are 2 stories just from James Goodall. You could find that on YouTube that, again, lend credence to S4 being real. And I can't think of the guy's name. I spoke to it about the last time I was on, about the archaeologist who went from west to east and basically found or tried to follow the old 49ers, the gold rush, and he walked across the Nevada test site and into where S4 would be, Papoose Lake, and he saw, Jerry is his name, one night he was there, and he saw the side of the mountain open up, and daylight came out, and the door shut, and he didn't know what to think. And he's not into UFOs or anything like this. I know Joe Mirja wrote about this because I had mentioned the guy died a year later of cancer. Well, I didn't know at the time because, again, I'm going off of what I had learned from George Knapp. The guy died of cancer that was not related to him being at Papoose Lake because it's such a irradiated area because all the nuclear tests that had gone on. But, again, those are just, again, more data points to prove that S4 is definitely real.
All right. Now, before we wrap up, does anyone else have anything that they want to share?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead, Ryan.
3 words. Disclosure in 2019.
more on the way. Let's certainly hope so. But we're not running out of things to talk about. That's for sure. Well, again, folks, a fantastic roundtable. We've had a lot of success with these. I think a lot of information has gotten out that is worth sharing. A lot of different perspectives, a lot of different ideas getting kicked around. Well worth my time. Thank you, everybody, for coming on. Chant Hannah, thanks for joining us. Thanks for helping us out, especially with your little find about the hand scanner technology. Thanks so much for coming on board.
Thank you very much for having me.
And Ryan, again, thank you for coming back with us. Always a pleasure. And when are we going to see part 2 of your own Lazar, the trial of Bob Lazar? When can we look forward to that?
My goal is that it will happen this week.
Got it. Fantastic. Thanks again, Ryan.
Thank
Chris
you.
Wolford, again, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing what you know. And let's, I don't know if this is going to be our last show of the year, but if not, I know we'll be having you back on come 2019.
Oh, really? That'll be fun. I get back on. Oh, I must be doing something right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, guys. I know. Thank Ryan and thank Chant for that piece that she found was huge. I didn't even. I mean, I had seen it in the documentary, but I didn't know how in depth. I mean, the Department of Naval Intelligence, that's huge. That's a huge find.
It does corroborate where Lazar said he was employed. So there you go. And James Yandoli, thanks again for co-hosting this. Again, you did a fantastic job putting all this together.
Oh, absolutely. I love it. It's my pleasure. I love getting together with everybody like this.
All right, so let's wrap this up, folks. Everybody who's listening in, thanks a lot for joining us. Obviously, if you came in a little bit late, the whole thing will be properly uploaded, and you'll be able to listen to it from the beginning. But it was a blast. It was real. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back soon with another fabulous show. Thanks again. Good night, everybody, and have a good one. Bye-bye now.